Hey everyone, Georgie here with Ukraine Matters. Ukrainian armed forces have requested a media blackout for the situation around Kherson frontline. So today I'm going to be focusing on other direction and we're going to be discussing some other topics. First things first, today, right now, is the time for us to talk what is the situation on the northern front line with regards to the quantity of troops, because what I have been telling you from time and time again in the past months and so on is that from the potential northern direction, the counterpunch that Russia wanted to do against Ukraine to make sure that Ukraine has to dedicate resources up north, since then a lot of that grouping has been diminished and it's been sent both to Avdiivka front line, both also to the Zaporizhia front line and to other places in Ukraine. So what are we looking at right now if we would to approximately count the number of troops that are operating in this area? Well, thankfully, certain analysts have looked at it, have looked at the units that are operating in the area, so we can get an approximate estimation. And I think it's great because we finally can start understanding the scale of this warfare. So the northern, the Kupiansk direction front line, which is approximately this part over here, we will have a grouping of about 60,000 personnel. Then there's, with regards to vehicles, there are 700 tanks. However, most of it due to because of the units that are operating in this area. It is not confirmed if the tanks are actually present, and potentially the tanks have been dedicated to certain other units, but nominally they're there. And then we have about 1,000 armored fighting vehicles, which is infantry fighting vehicles, APCs, all of this technical armored stuff, and so on. And with regards to artillery, we have about 650 of artillery pieces, which is 100 millimeters or up. And then we have about 180 of rocket artillery. This is the grouping that we're looking at up here north. Unfortunately for Russians, they are not having significantly good positions here to start their attacks from. So while this grouping does look kind of strong, it's not nearly enough to achieve any kind of significant goals. Doesn't mean that they will not try. It's enough for defense in the area, but it's not enough to pose any kind of significant threat for Ukrainian armed forces. Going a little bit south, if we're looking at this front line over here, going around Liman, so to speak, area. So right now there's only 40,000 troops and personnel that are operating in this area. They have only about 300 tanks in the area, and they have 700 AFVs, which brings and 400 artillery pieces. This is, again, the numbers here are mostly nominal. We might expect that they are lower than this, but this is a good ballpark estimate of what we're looking at. In this direction, you might notice that generally speaking, it's a lot smaller than even the northern Kupiansk direction. However, the troops that are operating in this area are a little bit more experienced, so there's a little bit of a seniority. And secondly, this area over here, this a little bit of a salient that Russians are having, is a very nice position to be in. It's both well fortified, and it also allows to be a great springboard for any kind of potential Russian offensive. However, because of the situation on the front line, it still poses a threat for Ukrainians, and that's why Ukrainians are actually dedicating forces in this area. But both of these directions have been a little bit now thinned out, and they've been thinned out because Russians have been sending troops to both Avdiivka, which is south, and to Bakhmut. You might ask, why Bakhmut? Well, the short answer is because the order of stop that shit came in. To put it in perspective, Ukrainians have been doing a quite successful slow push offensive, which allowed them to slowly but surely go through the southern part of Bakhmut, reach out key tactical positions, and take over the northern heights of Klishivka, then push Russians to the railway, and then also breach the railway to take the positions to the east of railway, which is all great positions, and Ukrainians were demonstrating quite good tempo, even without dedicating a lot of additional resources. Russian forces that were present in the area could not really hold Ukrainians, and therefore, to be honest, like, we need to give credit where credit is due, unfortunately, is that what we saw south of Bakhmut was actually technically the Russian defense in depth, how it's supposed to be. In this area here, when Ukrainians were advancing, when Ukrainians reached these heights around Klishivka, it was a favorable position for Russia to hold. That's why we saw Ukrainians advancing, and then when they reached the heights around Klishivka, it took a lot of time for Ukrainians to actually go through Klishivka, to actually take those heights, because it was a favorable positions for Russians to fight in. Beyond that, when Ukrainians reached the railway line, Russians were also trying to fight for the railway line. Unfortunately, when that railway line was penetrated, then Russians quickly retreated to a more favorable certain positions around Kurdyumivka, around north of here, and around to east of Andriivka. And it was all good and fun. The problem came when it felt like that Ukrainians were applying significant enough pressure for Russians to already submit in their report to the higher up command that their next step would be falling back to the favorable positions around then the line of Opitne Odradivka, and potentially later on coming back all the way back to this road. This doesn't fit the Russian narratives. We know that Russia right now they're trying to play for perceptions. They want to show as much as possible that there is a deadlock right now, that nothing is moving anywhere, that Ukrainians are achieving nothing, and it's only Russians that are going forward without disregarding any cost, because that's how crazy the Russians are. What they saw here saying, oh, this is a proper solid plan, we cannot have that. Therefore, the order to stop that shit came in, and they said, okay, take these reinforcements from the north, from Liman, apply the pressure on Bakhmut, both from the south and also from the north. So the forces that came in from Liman and Kupiansk directions, they were applied both in the northern side to start pressuring Ukrainians in the northern, which doesn't really give a lot of advantage for Russians, because they still held the major heights at the major tactical positions in the area. They were holding all of the necessary heights in the area, so they didn't really need to. There was no necessity for them to attack forward, but they did it anyway, because Russians. And then they also attacked from the south, and right now they're pressuring towards Klishivka, towards those positions. They're trying to pressure Ukrainians to get them beyond the railway road. And this is all falls into pattern as like, well, we need to show that Ukrainians are achieving nothing. That's why I'm not giving numbers right now for Bakhmut direction, because right now Russians are sending in reinforcements. These reinforcements came in, they achieved certain results. The very intense fights happened and are still kind of ongoing, but it does seem that those reserves that were sent are slowly coming to an end. So right now is a decision moment. If Russia would want to kind of move forward to secure area around Bakhmut, then we would need to see more reinforcements being sent into this area, which inevitably will weaken the northern Kupiansk and Liman directions, securing Ukrainians a little bit of a safer overview of the front line in the north, which is really, really good. It seems I will have to make more videos this week because I have plenty of topics listed right over here. And the first and most hottest, or probably coldest topic right now is the weather. The absolute mud season weather has set into Ukraine. We saw not just rain overflowing of trenches, we also saw significant snowing. We saw the weather conditions degrading very rapidly. And right now, the weather situation is in a complete deadlock. We should not expect any kind of mechanized assault. If they do happen, it will be sitting ducks assaults. If I'm wrong and it will happen, it will be another dumbest level of dumbness that Russia will achieve. So obviously we should expect that potentially it can happen. Beyond that, the important topic that I wanted to cover was the number of personnel that Russia is recruiting. So Medvedev, the chief alcoholic of the Russian Federation, has been pushing out crazy numbers of 415,000 troops have signed contract with the Russian Federation, which are triggering me to no end whenever someone tries to mention that number, because that number is complete nonsense. Is Russia still getting people? Yes, majority of personnel that they're getting new are in two categories. Those are prisoners and those are recruits that are being recruited on a regular basis twice per year, so like 19, 20-year-olds in Russia, and they're being pushed and pressured into signing military contracts to be able to send them then to the front lines. Those are the two main parts that are supplying Russian Federation with actual new forces. Russia themselves are actually stating that number, again, if we believe Russian official numbers, because we shouldn't. And they're stating specifically, they're stating that right now we are having in Russian army, we have 415,000 new contracts signed, of which there is 80,000 volunteers, which doesn't really make sense, because those volunteers, they're signing contract with the Russian military, so they should be the same contract military that they mentioned before. The trick is in paper dynamics. It's pure bureaucracy, because in that 300 plus thousand, the rest of the troops that were signing the contracts with the Russians are people whose contract has run out because they had a contract, but because Russia has implemented the rule that contract cannot be dismissed while the special military operation is ongoing, therefore they should sign a new contract to kind of extend their participation, and they just take and put that number back on the paper. So the same person that was on the contract before and now continuing fighting on the new contract, he's added to that 300 plus thousand troops. Secondly, mobilized troops are now being massively moved from being a mobilized fighting on the front line to becoming a contract fighter. So the degree of mobilized people on the front line is falling constantly because they're signing contract as mobilized. They cannot leave. They cannot escape service, but if they're in contract, they're at least getting supposedly paid a little bit better. Therefore, you get on paper a lot more new contracts signed, but it's again the same people that were already on the front lines. And then the third option is that Russians are using Wagnerites and other mercenaries that were fighting before on the front lines, and all of the media were writing about, wow, Russians are having such a fractured military with so different chains of command, and they say, okay, let's now centralize the chain of command, and we're gonna bring these forces back in. Remember, it was what triggered Prigozhin to start his march on Moscow. But post this march, a lot of these mercenaries actually signed contracts with the Russian Federation. The trick is, it's the same forces that were already fighting on the front line. In a nutshell, what Russians are stating, that in their year as they dedicated this effort to get new forces, they were able to get maybe additional 80,000 new recruits by their own numbers. Is it a lot? It's quite a lot. It's quite a lot. It allows Russia to maintain the current force composition, to maintain those 400 like ish something thousand people on the front lines fighting, but it's not enough to switch the dynamics of the war around. For that, Russia just doesn't have the capacity. Thank you so much for watching this. I want to just say that we have some issue with YouTube, that YouTube algorithm for some reason is deleting comments in the comment section. Both me and my moderating team are baffled for this. We have no idea what is causing it and why this is happening. So if you see your comment disappearing, please know that it's not us. It's not about what you said. Just certain things are happening. We don't know why. In any case, I will make more videos this week to cover the rest of the topics, hopefully. Slava Ukraini, guys. I love you all, and I'll see you next time.